No ego parasitic infection is going to do that. Going to give you your free will. You have to take it. What is it going to take to get the ego parasitic infection to stop running your life? Within and without. Shine your universal light, universal wisdom and knowledge, and universal truth. Ego infection takes advantage of free will by suppressing someone else's free will. The witch hunting and all the terrorism is the twisted minding of the ego parasitic infection, keeping you from having the magic power of Christ. The ego infection keeps you from becoming Christ. How the ego parasitic infection affects the soul, it separates you from your God and soul power, which is your supernatural power. Your ego infection is a supernatural angel, God and goddess disease of the flesh. The reason anyone ruled by their ego can't tell you how to be is because the ego is unstable. They're infected with a closed-minded, violent, drunk, psychotic, narcissistic, physical, neurological, and spiritual disorder. Let's talk about what are the symptoms when a sleeping god or goddess that's infected with the ego parasitic infection. First of all, no supernatural power. Ego parasitic infection strikes fear and hate in the hearts and minds of their prey, using God and religion to enslave and suppress you, and this planet to take your free will. They take things for granted. They act judgmental. Prosecution and persecution behavior. Lying, greedy, inflicting their destructive, violent, suppressive, manipulating, controlling, demonizing, delusional to reality from illusion, bullying, deceptive, highly attacked, close-hearted and minded with hatred and judgment, also blind and deaf to universal truth, false sense of power by manipulating and controlling with violence and warfare, self-absorbed, sociopathic, sexual sadist, narcissistic, reckless, self-destructive, suicidal, homicidal, infected with illness and disease, and episodes of psychotic rage. Unjustified anger turns into depression. To be ruled by your ego is to be asleep to universal truth around and within you. The ego parasitic infection keeps you asleep in the illusion that you see with your blind and deaf ego parasitic infected eyes and ears. If you're stuck in the illusion, you'll never grow. The ego parasitic infection keeps you in the dark to keep you lost. The ego parasitic infection has no business managing you. This is the beginning of the end of darkness. The ego infection is the source of pain, suffering, death, and disease. Eliminate the ego infection, you eliminate pain, suffering, death, and disease. You are allowed to be free from this parasitic infection that is the master of puppets. You have to take responsibility for your own ego. Men, women, and this planet has to be free from the ego possessive deadly grip before the ego destroys you and this planet. You must beat the ego from within first, then without. If you are not controlling your ego, it's controlling you. Armageddon means to unveil your Christ kingdom, the Holy Trinity's kingdom, in the Garden of Eden. The ego parasitic infection does not want this. It is a sick, twisted game to keep you out of the Garden of Eden. The ego cannot survive in the Garden of Eden. Armageddon is the battle of the Christ and Antichrist. The parasitic infected, closed-minded, manipulating, controlling, suppression of the unveiling is the battle within and without. It takes Christ consciousness to beat the ego parasitic infection, which are the requirements. Using Christ consciousness with the three octahedrons in the Merkaba eliminate the ego parasitic infection from you. You are not your ego parasitic infection. It possesses you, then takes control of you. You are a divine being with a supernatural disease. The octahedrons in the Merkaba acts as a filter to literally filter out what you are not and create an alignment with your divine essence. The octahedrons in the Merkaba will help us to adjust to holding to a greater electrical charge of our divine essence. It takes a divine being to have dominion over the physical plane to enter the Wright Garden of Eden. You can't deny yourself being Christ. You can't deny anyone else being Christ. You can impose a death sentence for yourself by not being Christ. You can impose a death sentence for yourself, but no one else. No one is allowed to suppress and control people from being Christ no longer. Otherwise, the ego parasitic infection is possessing sleeping people, being in control, trying to suppress and control other people outside of them, self, even lying, saying it's God. The ego is the opponent of God. If it is with ego, it is not God. Ego stands for evacuating God out. The ego parasitic infection is the destroyer of nations and worlds. The ego infection is a true threat to national and global security. That is the global conspiracy that the ego parasitic infection using the Christian church to keep you from becoming Christ, suppressing God's light. This ego parasitic infection is a global epidemic running rampant, and it is time to put a stop to it. It takes Christ consciousness to beat the ego. Christ consciousness is the only thing more intelligent than the ego. Christ consciousness is a supernatural consciousness. How much longer are you going to let the ego infection run your life? Only the supernatural power of Christ consciousness can save you and earth from this supernatural ego parasitic infection, keeping you from the supernatural fruits of the Wright Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 8 through 9, the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put a man who he had formed. 9. And out of the garden the Lord God made every tree grown that is pleasant to sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 15 through 18. Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. 16. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, freely eat. 17. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. 18. And the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. Verse 21 through 22. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. 22. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 through 6. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field, which said the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, has God indeed said, shall you not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden. 3. But the fruit of the tree which is the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat. Now shall you touch, lest you die. 4. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. 5. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree describable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave her husband with her, and he ate. Genesis chapter 3, verse 22 through 24. Then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put out his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. 23. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden, to till the ground for which he was taken.